Before we get started today, I'd like to remind you that we have 2 weeks until the end of classes. By way of helping you to prepare for our exam, we will only have 4 more lectures. That includes today's lecture. Our final exam will be held April 16th from 11 to 12:15 during our normal class time, and that will be our last day of class. At midterm, we were given a exam study guide that can be located in e-learning content. Studying for your exam will involve understanding concepts, movements, and styles associated with modern art. Prepare yourselves for the exam by being able to identify artists' works, who made them, the name of the artist, styles that those works are associated with, and or titles of those works. Thus far, we have been studying varieties of ways to appreciate art by breaking down concepts of how to look, understand, articulate, and evaluate art, including the purpose and functions of art, artist communication, responding to art, in evaluation and criticism, styles of art, elements and principles of art, and media and materials of the artist. In the next few lectures, I'll present to you modern art and historical content. Much of modern art is a series of chain reactions. Groups of artists were living, working together, and they were exploring philosophies and techniques in art making. Modern art is incredibly fascinating because art changes so radically in a small amount of time and has great influence on contemporary artists even to this day. The history of the United States has definitely influenced the types of art holdings in our U.S. art museums. Stage your mind at a time frame. The United States, only 243 years old, is a relatively young country as compared to 1600-year-old France. And I use this date because the Declaration of Independence was ratified in 1776. So it's fitting that the U.S. would have art holdings that represent who we are as a people. Young, progressive, forward thinkers, risk takers, explorers of uncharted territories. Americans were the first to recognize the potential of modern art and to begin collecting it. I've always made the argument that if you want to see modern art, it's right here in your own backyard. No need to external abroad to other countries because we have the finest examples of modern art here in the United States. And much of that has to do with earlier lectures that we've had in this class that have concerned the world wars, the escaped many persecuted artists to the United States. They came to cities that namely were New York and Chicago, and they began practices that became established practices and institutions throughout the United States. And those institutions were such as the Illinois Institute of Technology, the School of the Chicago Art Institute, the Black Mountain College in North Carolina, and many others. Thus, the reason that I have chosen to use the remainder of our time together to discuss the developments of modern art in a historical context. My feelings are that with this knowledge, you can walk into any of the museums throughout the world and look at more complicated themes that developed from modern art. You'll be able to have a general understanding of why and how, and furthermore, it makes contemporary art, which is especially hard to understand, approachable. The U.S.'s first museum of art opened in 1884 in Hartford, Connecticut. 34 years later, the Art Institute of Chicago was founded in 1879 and is one of the oldest and largest art museums in the United States. In New York, the Museum of Modern Art opened in 1929, and its first successful loan exhibition was displaying post-impressionist paintings that same year as it opened by artists such as Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne, and Seurat. Then in 1930, the Whitney Museum of American Art was established in New York, as well as the Guggenheim, a little less than 10 years later. And due to these major institutions establishing themselves, many cities throughout the U.S. followed suit, developing art museums that replicated those established museums before them. In the 1960s through the 70s, entered contemporary art museums into the picture, such as the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, that was established in 1967, and is still one of the world's largest contemporary art venues. These museums feature living artists, and they usually address global concerns with strong references to academic practices of modern art. Three revolutions: the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in 1760, the American Revolution in 1775, and the French Revolution in 1789, launch a period of great social and technological change we call the modern age. The Industrial Revolution brought about the most significant shift in the way people lived since the Neolithic agricultural revolution 10,000 years earlier. The Enlightenment, or Age of Reason, as the 18th century had been called, was characterized by a shift from religious, political, social, and economic issues to a more rational and scientific approach. Belief in the importance of liberty, self-determination, and progress brought about an emphasis on democracy and secular or non-spiritual concerns. Systems for understanding the world became increasingly fragmented. Traditional values were challenged by the new atmosphere. Independent investigations were led by radical changes in technology and by increased mixing of people and cultures. Artists simply expressed these changes. In the Western world, this new consciousness led to increased uncertainty about the place of art and artists in society. Following the French Revolution and the subsequent break with traditional art patronage in France, a variety of styles developed simultaneously. Those styles were neoclassicism, romanticism, realism, impressionism, and post-impressionism. Artists were freed from the artistic constraints imposed by their traditional patrons of the upper class. Those were the royalty, the aristocracy, the merchants, bankers, and the church. They were left to struggle financially until a new system of patronage emerged. Eventually, support came in the form of commercial galleries, private and corporate collectors, and museums. This work, titled Oath of Horatii, created in 1784, is by Jacques-Louis David. It's an oil on canvas, enormous in size, 14 feet wide by 10 feet high. David led the way to revolutions in both art and politics. Oath of Horatii is an austere style a painting in neoclassic style. The term refers to the emulation of classic Greek and Roman art. Much of the subject matter of neoclassical art was Roman because Rome represented a republican or a non-monarchical government. The painting depicts a story of virtue and the readiness to die for liberty. Three brothers pledged to take the sword offered by their father to defend Rome. The objective of the painting was to give revolutionary leaders an inspiring image of themselves that was rooted in history. The message of the painting was, take courage, and that your cause is a noble one that has been fought before. Another evidence of neoclassicism is in this triangular geometric structure of the composition. The tip of the sword butts that shape outward down to the bottoms, the external bottoms of the feet of the men. It creates this imaginary triangular shape. The painting also has the quality of a relief sculpture. It's lit with a strong side lighting that emphasizes the figures in the foreground. And then you also note in the background there are architectural elements that are historically appropriate for these Roman figures. And then one last detail of the painting is that you'll note that there are women located off on the right, that they seem to be overcome by emotion, and this painting reflects what was commonly believed at that time, that women were unfit for public life. This painting, there were actually two of them made, and interesting enough, one of them hangs very close to us in the Toledo Museum of Art, and that was the duplicate that David painted. This is the Death of Marat, and it is a painting made in 1793, again by David. Here, the murdered French revolutionary leader, and this is one of the most famous images that relates to the French Revolution. And here is another sample of neoclassicism style. We note that it has all of the stylings and use of imagery previously mentioned, that art should serve a political purpose in a time of social and governmental reform. There are consistent themes of power and reason affected by the Age of Enlightenment, and we also see an emulation of styles of the Greek and Roman art forms. Now, the neoclassical spirit was also filtering through architecture. American architecture achieved international stature in architect Thomas Jefferson's original design for his home, Monticello. And this is basically a reinterpretation of country-style houses. It now exists as a World Heritage Site, UNESCO, and then what's mentionable about this is that Jefferson was strongly influenced by French, Italian, Roman architecture. Jefferson's design was for the University of Virginia, and it really shows a Roman influence. This phase of neoclassical American architecture is often called the Federal or Jeffersonian style. And in this architecture, Jefferson aims to create a building that expresses the values of the new American Republic. And this style is reflected in much of American architecture until the Civil War. This is a painting by Ong, or several paintings by Ong, and he was acknowledged as a leader of the neoclassical school in France. In his work, we see expressive distortions of form and space, and this is what really made him an important precursor of modern art. His works influenced the likes of Picasso and Matisse, as well as many other modernists. He's known for his important portraits of women. We see the Turkish bath, a portrait of a woman, and La Grande Odalisque, probably his most famous of all the paintings. The Turkish bath is one of the last of his several paintings that were influenced by Orientalism. So this really exotic subject matter occurs in his work, and we do see very supple portraits of female nudes. And then, as I mentioned before, the La Grande Odalisque is one of the most important works by Ong. It was created in 1814 and still hangs in the Louvre. It depicts a concubine. Now, Ong's contemporaries considered the work to signify his break from neoclassicism and indicated a shift towards exotic romanticism, which is the next movement in art that we'll look at. La Grande Odalisque attracted wide criticism when it was first shown, and it is renowned for its elongated portions and lack of anatomical realism. You'll notice looking at the back of this woman, we see there's no, she can physically stand. Her spine has been elongated and is portion. Notice that her buttocks area is incredibly large compared to the, exaggerated, if you will, compared to her feet, hands, and head. Now, the next movement that we'll look at is Romanticism, and this was embodied most strongly in the visual arts, music, and literature. It inspired individual styles of art making. The movement emphasized intense emotion as an authentic source of its aesthetic experience, placing new emphasis on emotions such as apprehension, horror, and terror, and awe. In this movement, Romanticism creates new aesthetic categories of the sublime that transcend greatness or beauty for the observer, as well as a celebration for history and nature. Now, Francisco Goya was a Spanish Romantic painter and printmaker, and he was a contemporary of David and very much aware of the French Revolution. He personally experienced some of the worst aspects ensuing the Napoleonic era when French armies invaded Spain. And this is an image of one of those tragic incidents that he witnessed. Goya was vividly and bitterly depicted, bitterly depicted the brutalities of organized murder on the May 3rd in 1808. This painting is not a mere reconstruction of history. It is a universal protest against the brutality of tyrannical governments. So what makes this romantic? It's the intense emotion, the translation of the visceral feeling that we as viewers have for that man that's standing there with upstretched arms on the firing squad. You also notice that there's this structured pattern of light and dark areas that really organizes the scene, giving it impact and underscoring its meaning. Goya focuses attention on the soldiers by means of value shift that define a wedge-shaped form formed by a hill and brightly lit areas on the ground. Mechanical uniformity marks the faceless firing squad in contrast to the defenseless group that is the target. And the rifles guide our eyes to the point where this man is standing with raised arms in a gesture of defiance. This is another image by Goya, Saturn devouring his son. It is possibly the most famous of his series called Black Paintings. That name, the Black Paintings, was given to a group of 14 paintings created by Goya from later years in his life, between 1819 and 1823, and they portray intense, haunting themes that are reflective of both his fear of insanity and his bleak outlook on humanity. Eugene Delacroix was an artist regarded from the outset of his career as the leader of the French Romantic school. As a painter and muralist, Delacroix's use of expressive brushstrokes and his study of the optical effects of color profoundly shaped the work of the Impressionist artists that would look at his pieces and follow after him, after his approaches. He had a passion for exoticism, evidenced in this depiction of Turk invasions. Delacroix's Death of Sardanapalus, created in 1827, hangs now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The subject is of Sardanapalus, a king willing to destroy all of his possessions, including people and luxurious goods, in a funerary pyre of gore and excess. Delacroix's painting shows an emotionally stirring scene, alive with beautiful colors, exotic costumes, and tragic events. The painting depicts a besieged king watching impassively as guards carry out his orders to kill his servants, concubines, and animals. This painting was created with a literary source of a play that made by Byron, although this play does not specifically mention any massacre of concubines per se. And then lastly, another painting by Eugene Delacroix is Liberty Leading the People. It was created in 1830 and hangs to this day in the Louvre in Paris. This is Delacroix's best known work. It is a romantic image of the spirit of liberty. It's an unforgettable image of Parisians who have taken up arms and are marching forward under the banner of the tricolor. The image represents liberty, equality, and fraternity. Although Delacroix was inspired by contemporary events, he seems to be trying to convey the will and character of the people rather than glorifying the actual event of the 1830 revolution against Charles X. Although the French government bought the painting, officials deemed its glorification of liberty too inflammatory and removed it from public view for a time being. It's of course returned to the walls of the Louvre. Now, John Constable was a romantic English painter with an interest in landscape. His was a response to the increasingly sooty air and sprawling factories of the Industrial Revolution. He was the son of a wealthy miller, and he painted the English countryside and developed a love for nature that stayed with him all of his life. He's recognized as one of the first painters to paint studies and oil sketches in the outdoors, on location, on plein air painting. His paintings are unique and they relay intangible qualities of light and weather. When Constable's painting The Hay Wain was exhibited in Paris, French artists were amazed by his vision of landscape. Constable broke away from conventional formulas of color and technique, and he had this innovative use of individual strokes of various color. He uses flecks of white on his canvas to suggest shimmering sunlight. And this brought him ridicule initially, but later praise from French Impressionists. In the US, the work of the Romantic painter Thomas Cole helped to stimulate enthusiasm for the grandeur and beauty of the best of American wilderness. This painting, The Oxbow, in Connecticut River in Northampton, was created in 1836. Cole is best known for his landscape and history paintings. His is regarded as, he is regarded as the founder of the Hudson River School, an important American group of landscape painters that flourished in the mid-19th century. Remember, Hudson River School for your test. Here's another example of a work by Thomas Cole. Cole began works on site in oil and pencil sketches, and then he made large paintings in a studio. He also produced thousands of sketches of varying subject matter. Over 2,500 of these sketches can be seen at the Detroit Institute of Art. And over on the right-hand side, those are some samples of what the DIA has in their collection. Another romantic painter is William Turner. And now, he's an English romantic painter, printmaker, and watercolorist, and he's known for his expressive colorization, imaginative landscapes, and turbulent and often violent marine paintings. His themes typically are man versus nature, and in his works you can see that man is a very small in the scheme of all this natural event that's taking place around it. His works are incredibly famous because of such weather formations, a depiction of weather in its extreme situations. Also, you notice that his paintings, they're all about atmosphere and the light that filters through them. This is remarkable. These were enormous paintings, at least 10 feet in any direction. So when you stand in front of them, they fill your entire view, your frame of view. And Turner's definitely one of my favorite artists. You'll notice how he blends the paint, and these recall that you stand back from them and look at them from afar to see these kind of shadowy effects of light on subject through atmosphere. Both neoclassicism and romanticism had their beginnings in rebellion, but by the mid-century, each had become institutionalized, functioning as a conservative force in French artistic life. At state-sponsored schools, students were taught by members of the Academy of Fine Arts, an organization of the government. The teachings demanded classical technique and subject matter found in history, mythology, literature, or exotic locations. Delacroix accused Academy members of teaching beauty as though it were algebra. Today, we still use the term academic art for generally unimaginative works that follow formulas instituted by an academy or school. Academy members played a major role in selecting artists for a huge annual exhibition known as the Salon. Participating in the Salon was virtually the only way an artist might become known to the public. The art history for the rest of the 19th century is largely one of rebellion against such institutions and authority figures, eventually leading the fall of the dominance of the French Academy. The camera was initially seen by landscape and portrait painters as a threat to their livelihood, when in fact it actually freed painters from the roles of narrator and illustrator, allowing them to explore dimensions of inner experience that had been largely neglected in Western arts since the Renaissance. Photography offered new opportunities to fuse images of objective reality with personal visions. Delacroix occasionally drew and painted from early photographs, as seen in this slide comparison. We see the painter's composition is determined by the photograph of a figure study. Delacroix was one of the very first to recognize the difference between camera vision and human vision, and he believed photography to be of great potential and benefit to artists. Nadar was an artist who came to prefer photography to drawing or printmaking, and he gained his fame as a balloonist, making the first aerial photographs. He also explored sewers and catacombs of Paris using artificial lighting techniques and long exposures. Nadar recognized that photography was merely a mechanical process and that the photographer had to be intelligent and creative in order to make significant works of art with the camera. The most notable artists, writers, and intellectuals of Paris went to him to have their portraits made. His photograph of the French artist Sarah Bernhardt is an evolutionary link between the romantic painting portraits of the 19th century women and glamour photography of today. As both a tool and a way of seeing, photography influenced the next major stylistic development in art, realism. Realism describes the style in art and literature that depicts ordinary existence without idealism, exoticism, or nostalgia. The artists that followed this movement revolted against the neoclassicists and romantics' attachments to mythological, exotic, and historical subjects. They believed that art should deal with human experience and observation. They knew that people in the 19th century were living a new kind of life, and they wanted art to show that experience. In the 1850s,